In this video, we'll be going over LeetCode problem 283, move zeros. The problem states that we're given an integer array called nums, and we want to move all zeros to the end of the array while maintaining the relative order of the non-zero elements. And we're told that we must do this in place without making a copy of the array. So let's take a look at a quick example. So here nums is this array over here, 0, 1, 0, 3, and 12. And the output is we want to move all the non-zero elements, so 1, 3, and 12, to the beginning. And then we want to place the zero element, so the two zeros, at the end. The problem statement is pretty straightforward, so let's take a look at how might this be done with an example. So here's our example here. It's a slightly longer array. Now what we want to do is we want to push all the non-zero elements to the beginning. So let's just start by traversing the array. So we might have some sort of index or pointer, and we'll start with the very first element. Now we see that this very first element is a non-zero element. And so what we want to do is we want to move it to the beginning of the array. Luckily, it already is at the beginning, so we don't actually need to move it. But the thing we do want to do is we want to increment our counter of the number of non-zero elements. So now that we've done that, we can move to the next element. So now at index 1, we see that the element at index 1 is indeed a 0, so we don't do anything. We just keep going. Index 2, again, it's a 0, so we don't need to do anything. Then we get to index 3, and we see that the element at index 3 is a non-zero value, so it's 7. So what we want to do is we want to move it to the beginning. And what's nice is this counter here is telling us how many non-zero elements we have, but it'll also give us the index right after the last non-zero element. So if we look at index 1 over here, we see that index 1 is right after the last non-zero element, which is this 3. So what we can do here is we can actually use that value and overwrite whatever was at index 1 with our current non-zero value, so the 7. And then the next thing we want to do is we just want to make sure that we increment this counter to indicate that we've just seen another non-zero value. So we increment that to 2. Then we keep going. So here, index 4, 0, so we don't do anything. Then we go to index 5. We see that at index 5, we do have a non-zero value, so this 2. So again, we're going to use this counter to indicate where to move this 2. And so here, we're going to overwrite this value, and we're just going to put the 2. And lastly, we're just going to increment this counter, so 3. Then we keep going. So here, index 6, that's a 0. Index 7 is a non-zero value. So again, we're going to use this. So it looks like we're overwriting at index 3. And we'll move our 4 over and then increment this. So now 4. And then we keep going. So here we have at index 8, we have an 8, and then we'll just overwrite whatever's at index 4. So that's an 8, and then increment this value. This becomes a 5. And then keep going, one last one. So index 9, we see that it's non-zero. So again, we're going to use the non-zero counter value to overwrite whatever's at index 5. We'll place our 1 there. So now we've moved all of our non-zero values to the front. The last thing we need to do, I forgot, we need to increment this value here one last time. So now we've moved all the non-zero values to the front. The last thing we need to do here is we need to make sure we add the zeros back. And what's nice is, again, we can use this counter, because remember that this counter gives us the index after the last non-zero element. So all we need to do is we need to use this index and just go from there and populate the rest of the array with zeros. So starting at index 6, we remove whatever is there and we simply overwrite with zeros. So 0, 0, 0, 0. And there we go, there's our final array. So let's now take a look at how we would code this up. So I'll be coding this up in C++. So let's take a look at what we need to do. So here we're given our vector of integers, nums, and we just want to implement the same approach we did in the example. So first thing we'll do is we'll declare our non-zero counter. So here's our non-zero counter, and we'll initialize it to 0. Then what we want to do is we just want to traverse the array, just as we did before. So we can just traverse starting at index 0, less than nums.size. We'll go through every element. And as we go through an element, what we want to do is we want to check, is that element a non-zero element or not? So we can index into our array, and if that element is not equal to 0, then what we want to do is we first want to overwrite, take this element at nums I, and overwrite whatever is at the index right after the last non-zero element. So we just use nums at non-zero equals whatever the current element is. And then we just need to increment our counter. So this loop here should move all non-zero elements to the front of the array. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to make sure we add back the zeros to the end. And the way to do that is remember that after this loop executes, this non-zero counter will give us the index right after the last non-zero element. So all we need to do is we just need to use that counter as our starting index. And again, we just want to go to the end of the array. And all we need to do is just add back our zeros. So simply nums at index I is equal to 0. And that's it. That is our solution. So let's submit it. Great, looks like it works. Thanks for watching.